Hey, everybody. So today I'm going to be talking to you briefly about the PRO Act, which is a pro-labor, pro-union legislation that's currently in the Senate. It stands for the Protecting the Right to Organize Act of 2021. And if passed, it would update the National Labor Relations Act to close loopholes and expand labor protections for more U.S. workers. So, what problem is the PRO Act trying to address? In short, income inequality, which we discussed in class in the middle of the semester. But since 1979, productivity has increased by 61.8%, while hourly compensation for your typical worker has increased only 17.5%. It's an even starker difference when we compare workers to high level executives like CEOs. And in National Labor Relations Board supervised union elections in 2016 and 2017, employers were found to have violated labor protections 41.5% of the time. But even when they are not breaking the law, they still have many legal routes to union bust and otherwise interfere in union proceedings. So, some of its key provisions, first and foremost, it would revise the current definitions of employee, supervisor, employer, contractor, things like that, in the NLRA to broaden the scope of workers included and afforded protections under the law. Also, the PRO Act removes employers from the union election process. So this is currently one of their legal ways of bogging down union proceedings, is by interfering and delaying in the union election process. It would also prohibit captive audience meetings, which is a really nice way of just saying mandatory anti-union propaganda meetings. It also sets a process with a clear timeline by which a first collective bargaining agreement must be reached. This is another way in which employers currently bog down union proceedings is by negotiating in bad faith and drawing out proceedings for years and years sometimes. It also prohibits employers from permanently replacing striking workers, bans the use of offensive lockouts, and removes prohibitions on secondary strikes. Uh, all this is in service of just strengthening workers' abilities to strike and gain leverage against their employers. And then finally, it would enforce civil penalties for violations under the NLRA, and corporate officials could actually be held liable for violations. Currently, they just kind of get a slap on the wrist and no civil penalties are imposed. All right, so the economic implications of labor unions. So, as we discussed in class, labor markets in the US are increasingly monopsonistic. And as you remember, what this means essentially is employers have some degree of wage setting power where they're able to set wages below marginal revenue product of labor, or in other words, their cost of hiring one additional worker is lower than the revenue gained from that worker. And the difference in value between the revenue gained from the worker or the value produced by that worker and the wage rate is surplus that's extracted directly from the worker to employers. So, as we can see, this gray area in the graph is surplus that is taken away from the workers. And then, we have the deadweight loss to the right of the gray. So, in summary, organized labor and collective bargaining allows workers to be more competitive in the labor market and to address a lot of those market power imbalances that a monopsony market has. So, indeed, in 2020, unionized workers earn on average 11.2% more in wages than their non union peers, with an even starker difference among Black and Hispanic union workers compared to their peers, which implies that the PRO Act is not just about economic justice, but racial justice as well. In 2020, only 10.8% of US workers belonged to a union, but 65% of Americans approved of labor unions. And this is actually the highest popular support of labor unions since 2003. So, seems like the popular support is there, and what we need is the political will. So I would urge the Senate to pass the PRO Act in a form that, at the very least, includes all the key provisions we talked about earlier, summarized again here, and ultimately the PRO Act would allow workers to advocate and fight for themselves to become more competitive in the labor market and get higher wages, better benefits, things like that. Ultimately addressing income inequality. So that's all I got for you guys. Thank you.